Okay, Marjorie is on.
We'll see if I can see. It's hard on the
Let me get up.
computer screen.
What do you want to do?
I want to get there and see if I can read on the screen. But that's often challenging. I lost my glasses about a week ago. Been looking for them. Well, because we're coming up on the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year in the northern hemisphere of Earth. It's the longest day in the southern hemisphere. For us, that's the day that we celebrate the rebirth of the sun because it gets as low as it's gonna get and then comes back. That's traditionally the day that we celebrate the rebirth of a sun god, of a solar god. And a lot of gods, particularly the sacrificial ones, the ones connected with being dismembered and resurrected, such as our Christ, um, are said to have been born on this day, which used to be before the precession of the equinox, which is an astronomical phenomenon that's happening every year, actually. It points the North Pole at a new North Star every so often. Um, and that's connected with this great year, which shows the changes of the ages. We talk about the age of Aquarius or the age of Pisces or Taurus, I just said was associated with the age of the pyramids. And um, the ancients were extremely aware of this and preoccupied with it. They didn't have TV, they didn't have a lot of light, so they watched the night sky and they became extremely aware of these cycles of time and watching the planets are called the wanderers, and they're in opposition to the fixed stars, which have their position throughout the year. Can we get this?
No, just put the,
There I am. This is dark. I don't know if it's all moving like this all together. All of the constellations form the backdrop of the night sky, and the planets moving within those cycles um, are called the wanderers because they don't stay in one spot. So they're different from the fixed stars. And the ancients were extremely preoccupied with this, more than you might think. And I just wanted to share with this group that there's this very traditional depiction of the regular occurrence of, if I could talk, um, the conjunction, excuse me, between Jupiter and Saturn. And that was said, it's called the Great Conjunction. That was said to be considered to be that was the minute hand to the hour hand of the precession of the equinox, which is changing the sign on the horizon at sunrise on the equinox. So that's what changes with the ages. That's what is meant when they talk about the age of Pisces. They're saying that that will be the sign on the eastern horizon when the sun rises. The backdrop will be the constellation of Pisces. And so that's the hour hand. That's moving more slowly. That's approximately every 2,500 years. The rate cycle, it's debated, but it's uh somewhere around 2,600 um years for every one of these major cycles. But the ancients were extremely aware of this, and a lot of artwork represents it. This is an illustration actually by Kepler, by Johann Kepler, who here it says was not just an astronomer, he earned money working as an astrologer. Astrologers divide the sky into 12 zones called houses of the zodiac. These 12 houses are divided into four groups of three called triplicities. The successive great conjunctions usually loop around between three corners of the triplicity. So you would go from each of the air signs, say, in succession. But due to the gradual drifting, they eventually move to the next triplicity, which means the next element. So that might be fire, air, earth, or water, um, which comes out of alchemy, really. They're not talking about the actual physical elements. Those are styles of transformation. And that's what the astrological cycles are really talking about. So, this guy says it's kind of like string theorists, they go too far. The great conjunctions stay within one triplicity for about 260 years, but then they drift to the next triplicity or element. This event is called a greater conjunction, and that's a major cycle. So you can see here we've got the fire is depicted by the upward pointing triangle and the element of the color of red. Green represents earth, blue represents water, and yellow represents air. And these are all very codified things. It's not, uh, you know, loose at all. So this is a good picture of this. The upward pointing triangle is traditionally speaking fire. Here, and that's what we see here. And then we have air, water, and earth. I'm sorry. But here, this is incredibly precise, actually. It's showing that it drifts. Just a few degrees. I'm trying to see where it talks about it. So they come together approximately every 20 years. So that's pretty regular, and it was the job of the shaman to know this. And they would sit on one hill and have sticks lined up on the next hill and watch where these events were happening, where the planets were coming into relation with one another, where the sun was rising. They would mark off the degrees of 360 degrees on a hill in the distance. That's where we get the idea of a circle being 360 degrees. It's because a year is 360 days, more or less. It's pretty close. So if you keep track of them, each one is roughly 120 degrees to the east of the last one. They trace out these enormous equilateral triangles in the sky. So they were paying attention to these things with, a lot of effort and a lot of precision. And you could say it was all just superstition, or, maybe it wasn't. They passed this on for generations. Three gate conjunctions would be 60 years later. You get back to a great conjunction in almost the same exact place in the sky, but it's shifted east by 7.25 degrees. That's what they were keeping track of. That's pretty amazing to think of these people doing, with sharpening sticks and, and putting them up in the distance, that they were keeping track of these degrees of the sky uh, on a hill in the distance around them. So Kepler was, a pretty advanced guy, and he was practicing this. That's what changed my mind. I went from being a complete skeptic to saying, I think I should see what this might be about. And I studied it for around 4 years before I made up my mind that I thought there was something to it. But I was just thinking about people like Kepler and Jung, whose work I knew somewhat, and that they couldn't just be fooling themselves with subjective, perceptions that were just self-fulfilling prophecies. I just didn't think they were that dumb or gullible. So these were a, a lot of pairs of planets make different patterns like this. And you see these patterns in all kinds of medieval sculptures and uh, carvings on the outsides of temples and ancient temples, Persian temples. The Persians were extremely advanced in their study of this and the instruments, the astrolabes that they had, and so on, to keep track of these cycles. And they considered it the practical side. That astrology was considered the practical side of the science, and astronomy was speculative, because nobody really knew what was going on or where or, how long. I think the real adepts certainly knew that the Earth was traveling around the sun, that's for sure. And I think a lot of them knew that the apparent retrograde motion was an optical illusion because those planets are in the distance around, traveling in a circle around the sun. When you get to this part of it, it looks like it's going backwards. But that's because we're sitting on this near side of the circle. We're here. So when they go to this part, it looks like they're going backwards because they're going around the sun. That's the real reason for the apparent retrograde. Um, I fought it for years. I did not want to be a believer. I just, stubbornly refused to go along with it. And I became convinced after years of noticing things like the car would break down, we would get lost, things would go on. At the time, I had a boyfriend who just had an intuitive liking of astrology, and he would know before I would know that it was retrograde. And he'd always laugh at me. He'd say, "Oh, you have to look in your book." I just know because some phone call didn't happen, some plan got screwed up, and the car was in the shop, and I just said, "Okay, three things, that must be it." And it was. So it was a big joke to him. And it took me a while, but I became convinced. This is when I was first studying. So uh, it fascinated me that these men like uh, Kepler and Jung, and they're, in very different times, but taking it seriously, and that people were spending this kind of time and energy to do these things, and like building the floor and charge a cathedral is a labyrinth. They drag those stones to Chartres, which is north of Paris. They dragged them there from Wales. It was this very special blue marble that weighed a ton. They had to drag it there with horses, with rolling it on logs, that they'd move the last log up to the front and push these slabs of marble on these rolling logs from Wales to France. Why would they go to that trouble? Why were they building these cathedrals that were, more elaborate than pyramids? And they showed all this astronomical knowledge and detail. Why were they bothering to do that? Um, so one example of this I wanted to share tonight for this occasion of, we're coming into the week of the winter solstice as we celebrate it in European cultures. Um, okay, so here he's going into there was a belief that all the planets in the entire solar system circled back to their original place, and that everything would be mathematically reproduced every 36,000 years. That's since been disproved. It doesn't work that way. But that was a belief that people held. They saw things as having uh here. Some astrologers thought the triangle formed by three successive great conjunctions rotate a full turn every 2,400 years. If so, that would happen 15 times every great year. But that it seems to be 2650, 2,650. Um, so another example of somebody who was very, very learned and very preoccupied with these things was Dante. And I had a really deep experience with this when I was studying him. It was after my astrological training. Um, I went back to college. I decided to go get, what kind of standard, finish my BA, and I was going to Sarah Lawrence, and I thought it would be kind of like uh, Oxford or uh, what's the other one? The other
Cambridge.
Cambridge. I visited Cambridge and I really liked it. I really liked the town there. Which it's kind of like a mini Americanized version of it. And there was a nice class in the Divine Comedy there in Dante. And something told me that he tells you a lot about the planets. He is mentioning them. That there was something, really profound going on here, that Dante was really up to something with the symbolism of the Divine Comedy. And it turns out what I figured out was that the whole thing, this is we'll send this out in the links. This is a worthwhile article. And I was wondering if I could find that other one, the other
Yeah, we'll
image
find it. Yeah.
of the cycle. So just these cycles alone are so regular and so consistent. The Mayans were really into them, for example. And eclipse cycles, they were they're still better at predicting eclipses with their tables than we are with computers nowadays. So people have been very fascinated by this for a long time. So I just had this idea that Dante was talking about something very specific, and he's telling you, and then I looked at the index that was provided with one of the translations I had found of the Divine Comedy. And if you look at the index, he's telling you where all the planets are located, the inner planets. He wasn't using the outer planets. Um, w- at at the point of this particular weekend, it's Good Friday, Saturday, and Easter Sunday. He tells you it's in 1300. It's a full moon, and it's Easter Sunday, which is associated with, it comes out of, uh, what's
the Easter.
yeah, it comes out of the Jewish holiday for
Oh,
Passover.
yeah.
So it's based on the moon and the equinox. It's the Easter Sunday is said to be the day that he rose uh, from the uh, from the crypt. Um, After Good Friday was I think the full moon I think was Easter Sunday. I don't remember exactly. This is like 30 years ago that I did this. But he tells you every detail of every planet except two are switched, which was a common alchemical thing to do. They called that a blind to hide the details, and you had to find your way through. It was like a false, lead in the trail and the code. You had to know to do that, but that was part of it. And he did that whole thing so that I decided to check it, and I tried to do a chart with the astrology software that I had for Easter Sunday 1300, and I tried to calculate that using the software, and it came back gibberish. There was absolutely nothing to it. And I was incredibly disappointed because it just felt so right, and it would have made sense. And I was, really disappointed trying to get my paper done on time and working frantically. And I got up in the middle of the night and something told me, try 1301. I have no idea why. So I fed 1301 into the software that I had. That was the very beginning of computer software and people having home computers. My father had one for his editorial work, and I had gotten my hands on some software that we didn't even have a hard disk for memory in those days. I had to load in like a dozen disks every time I wanted to use this software to get a printout. But so I did this in the middle of the night, and I did it for 1301, as best I could calculate what Easter Sunday would be in that year. It came back exactly what was in the index, including the switching of Saturn and Jupiter. And I remember I was like, kind of hysterical, laughing and crying when it worked out. I just felt this connection to Dante back at that time. And I was trying to figure out, well, how can I confirm this? And in the morning, I was, from New York. The class was at Sarah Lawrence in New York. I was staying in Connecticut, but I was back and forth a lot. I decided to ask Union Theological Seminary, and I had a friend at the Jung Institute going there, and I decided to ask uh, the at the damn my brain. The
Someone at the New Institute or
no, at the he was interested. He was following it all. But no, at the Museum of Natural History, the
oh
planetarium,
yeah, Hayden
at the
Planetarium.
Hayden Planetarium. I have this inflammation in my brain that happens. I forget my name at times. So I asked the Hayden Planetarium to tell me the day of the full moon, and the calendars had changed and everything. We had had the Gregorian and the Julian. I don't remember which way it went at this point. But with those changes of calendar and so on, I thought this will be a real challenge of the data to see if it's accurate, if they were really tracking these things. And they both came back positive. It was that day and that year. It was 1301, and apparently Dante wrote it several years later, but about that day, because it was so striking astrologically to have a full moon on the same day as the spring equinox. And it's not a very usual occurrence. So that was what he wanted to commemorate in this, novel length poem. That's incredible poetry. I have gotten my hands on several different, I was collecting translations at one point. My mother gave me all the Chiardi ones the first year that I started this. The Chiardi translations were just coming out at that point when I started this project. And they're just incredibly beautiful. And he was a polymath. He was fascinated by mathematics, history, everything. And he says that he based all the symbolism for Paradiso on the
Islamic.
Islamic teachings on heaven and the feminine. At that time, they were really big in Florence. He was in Florence, not in Rome. And so all of the symbolism that we think of as being so uh, Catholic and true to Mary and our Christian, it's practically uh, what do you call scripture at this point, the Divine Comedy. And so much of it was based on Islamic writings at the time that he was fascinated by. And at that time, there wasn't so much enmity, and the scholars often got together to share ideas and poetry and work together. And he was a part of that kind of culture. And he's writing against necromancers and fortune tellers. He's condemning them um, in the book. That's the text. But he means in a superstitious way. He was actually trained in the uh, church university in Florence at that time was run by the church. This was all church knowledge that they've since decided to hide behind closed doors. But they were aware of it, and they were depicting it in the stained glass windows and the sculpture. All the symbolism was part of what they were interested in and sharing and celebrating. Um, and the sun is the sun, and surrounded by the 12 disciples represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. And all of this was intimate for them at that time. And they may not have even read books, but they knew the symbolism in the stained glass windows when it was depicted. And this is what they were concerned about and interested in and celebrating. So that's, I feel, a part of the ancient backdrop to what we now celebrate as the Christ, as this incarnation, we could say, of uh, the divine, as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I would say, was also the goddess. Uh, so let me just see. That's part of what is behind the symbolism that I think we all know on an instinctive level of Christmas, of the Yule celebration, of the tree coming into the house. The evergreen tree represents eternal life, and the lights on the tree represent cyclical life. And these recurring cycles are very deep in our psyche. It's not a superficial thing at all. The cycle of Jupiter takes about 12 years. The cycle of Saturn is about 29 and a half. And all of this is part of our, it's like the math that we're hardwired with at this point. Um, so there's all this data on this. So you can uh look for this. This is called the synodic cycle. Synodic cycle. And as I said, there's all kinds of tiles and sculptures made of brass and all kinds of things from around the world telling this. So this is said that Kepler said to have witnessed the a conjunction um in the year 1603. So and that might have been what people saw as the Star of Bethlehem. That the two planets are especially bright when they're together. We just had one a couple of like last year. I don't really remember it being especially bright, but here's
Graphic, yeah.
a little graphic of it. Um, the Star of Bethlehem might have been one of these great conjunctions. It might have been with something else, and he computed that there was one in 7 BC, and they think that's around when he was actually born. Um, and I would say it was in March. That's when the lambs were, uh, you know, foaling, and not in December. But that was the tradition of the and see here there's Kepler wrote about the music of the spheres and the harmonic patterns. There's a, there's a lot to this that I think we've missed.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to see the rational take over, because I think these people were incredibly rational and incredibly aware of mathematical patterns and geometric, measurements and patterns that are very intricate and not superficial and not casually arrived at. I think they were really looking deeply at a lot of what was what was known, and it's been forgotten. I guess that's what I'd like to say. Do you have any
So,
questions?
so this has been how you got on the journey for astrology. This is,
This was a part of it. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, as I said, I was quite ambivalent. I didn't start out as a believer. I don't know why. I committed to learning how it worked and how to do it, how to calculate it, um, and read it before I believed in it,
right.
which is, I guess that's kind of strange, come to think of it now. But at the time, I was intrigued enough that I wanted to understand it more, and really because of Jung.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to stop the recording. Easier said than done. Let's see. Does this do it? Stop recording.